Well, welcome back, Ryan. Another week of figuring it out. BTV Security. We have Ryan Bradbury, who didn't quite get cited last time. So, I guess I want to get into how to get into penetration testing part dos. Part dos. And, we covered this with Matt Barnett last time. I think we got into some interesting high-level things, but you always want to leave folks wanting more. And I think that's what we did. We touched on kind of the mentality, the philosophy, how it's not about the tools. And we strongly believe that, but you have to have that willingness to learn, to try, to fail. And, I remember when I started messing with this stuff back in 2005, well, a little before then, but that's when I was doing it in earnest. It was quite a different world. I'll sound like the classic old guy here, like I usually do at BTV, but you had to like patch your own drivers to do things. And it was like literally Linux Live CDs that, you were running and booting from. And now, we have really awesome distros and virtual machines and plenty of disk and all. So, but to me, the fundamentals are still the same. You have to kind of know a bit about how things work so that you can effectively break it, right? And we were talking before, like there's networking, there's operating systems, there's, coding, development, whatever, just computer programming languages. What else did you kind of find useful as you got started?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest hurdle when getting into, offensive security, into penetration testing is that you have to understand that you're not possibly going to know everything at all at once, right? So I think some of the stuff that you guys talked about before with the mentality and, coming up with good resources and good places to go to, trusted advisors, trusted, people in the space is huge. But I think, right, you got to constantly be comfortable learning and constantly be striving to learn more and more as you get into it. So I think, everybody kind of gets into the space from a different, their path to doing the pen testing can be very different. I think we have a lot of folks that come from the network administration side, from the system administration side. So I basically started right in security. So I didn't start with a foundation in system administration or network administration or, outside of just some side projects and some things, back in school. I didn't have a ton of development experience either. So it was sort of drinking from a fire hose. It still is, right? So it's still, how can you digest, can you learn, can you get into? So I think, right, generally you look at the operating systems, you touched on that a little bit, but, when we're looking at our customers, our clients, most of the time you're looking at Windows environments, not all the time, right? But so I think, operating systems is a huge one, especially Active Directory environments, Windows services. How can we use and abuse those? You mentioned, I think I don't know if you mentioned, but web application frameworks, web applications, right? So understanding common web application vulnerabilities is huge, right? How can we leverage, vulnerability A to get access to a web server, and how can we pivot and escalate our access in that environment, in that context, to gain, administrative access to the host system. And then, database is a huge one as well. So understanding common database commands, how to query information, how to inject,
There's some SQL, right? Like, it's awesome if you can recite to me the definition of SQL injection. That's fine. Know that. You should know that if you want to get into this. But if you don't know some basic SQL, how are you going to find injection points? And I can name you tools, right? Like, name whatever all the cool kids are using these days. In my day, it was, SQL Ninja, SQL Map. There was browser plugins. There's still all that stuff still exists.
Nice
right?
name drops. Nice name drops.
It probably dates me, but SQL Map was like in its infancy, and I remember the first time I tried to run it. I think I'll use this quick example. I thought I could just hit this tool and go. And I'm not saying like I knew SQL, but that was one of my specializations in college. So, like, I actually had some like grounding in Oracle, Oracle 8i. And so I actually knew some SQL commands, like, and I knew why they worked. I knew how like unions worked, and I knew all that stuff theoretically, but I never did it. I wasn't a DBA, right? So I thought, here, I'll just run the SQL Map tool, and it has this library of stuff. And at least at that time, bonked terribly. It wasn't going to work because I wasn't feeding it the right parameters, the right list, and I wasn't even looking at what it was giving back to me. I thought it was errors and it wasn't. So I had to recalibrate that. Like that, there's no magic go button. And when there is, you should question why you're using that tool, right? Like, knowing, and one of the things that you and I had chatted about in the past, and again, date myself here with like EtherCap, which is a layer 2 tool. And that's why networking is important to me, because if you know where something works, you kind of know why it might work and how it might work. So, you're doing a layer 2 injection attack or whatever you're doing, but you're operating at layer 2. Well, you're going to know that means layers 3, 4, and really you're not really in the OSI model, you're in a TCP/IP model for real, but I'll go OSI model for explanation. You're higher in the stack, and you're going to see that kind of information come in. So that can set your expectations on what data you will get or won't get, and what damage you might cause, right? Like I remember setting up EtherCap one time and bringing down a network because my little NIC couldn't keep up with the network traffic. And you have to know why it works and how it works.
No, absolutely. And I think that's one of the great things about the security community, the industry as a whole, is that there's so many people out there that are willing to, that are spending, 40 hours a week minimum doing a bunch of research, coming up with new techniques, new tools, new things to do. But if you don't understand that the fundamentals of what you're doing, right? You could easily go online, you could Google something, you could download it, you could get it up, and you could click, you could aim it and click go. But right, knowing what's going to happen, what could happen, right? Especially if you're going to run it in, a production environment, right, on an assessment. So, yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you need to have those fundamentals. Networking's huge. How to issue, basic commands on a Windows system, on a Linux system, right? Those are huge.
Microsoft net commands, like those have been around for 20, 30 years-ish. Like I think Windows NT or original NT introduced them. Like, know how to navigate with those, because living off the land is a lot of what you guys are doing today, right? Like you're not going to be able to just drop your tool set onto every client environment, because antivirus, anti-malware, other tools will probably catch that activity, or we have to operate as if they'll catch us and we don't want to get caught.
No, absolutely. That's another big thing. It's kind of the big phrase. I guess it's maybe dying down a little bit, but that laying off the land is huge, or has been big for a while, right? How do you blend in with common traffic? How do you abuse what's already happening on the network to be sneakier, to be quieter, and how can you leverage that to further your access within an environment? And it's big. And so, I mean, I don't know if it's helpful to dive into some of those right now, but some of the things that we use that you can find a ton of great information and resources out there on. A big one is Responder. That's one that I've been using for 5-6 years now. Yeah, to date myself, not quite as bad as you. But that's one, we're abusing, common protocols that exist within Windows environments, and it's a way to capture and attempt to crack some credentials for whichever environment you're in. That's a huge one. One of the other things that we're doing a ton of now is abusing domain joined databases. So that's another big thing to understand and know. There's some, again, great resources out there. For the tool is called Power Up SQL. But again, if you're going to take that tool, run it, and not understand how it works, you could be getting yourself into a lot of trouble. So I think that's one thing we talked about as well, is that, while there's these great tools and these great things out there, it's really important to know how to do a lot of these things that we're trying to do on a penetration test multiple different ways. So whether it's with a PowerShell script, whether it's through a CLI, whether it's through the command prompt, it's very important to understand those things.
Yeah, and even just knowing and to go back to networking, for example, like running a port scan. Well, everyone's going to tell you Nmap, right? So if someone said like, what's the kind of number one tool? It's going to vary depending on purpose, right? But Nmap is a fairly common tool, and know the syntax for that. Absolutely, know it, use it, test it. But what if I take Nmap away from you? What can you do? And there's actually ways through the Windows command line. You just do a quick Google search, like Windows command line port scan. You will find there are ways to just native Windows commands where you can make it run. Now, a smart defender will monitor for things like that, because that is very abnormal behavior. But it's going to fly a bit more under the radar, or should in many cases at least, than just dropping Nmap exe onto a Windows host, right, that you have living there. Or, again, there's a variety of other ways. Some of these tools have that kind of stuff built in these days, but the point is, if all you know is the syntax within that one tool, you're going to get locked up the second that tool's taken away from you. So yeah, download your Kali, like we said in part 1, download your Kali Linux, know the tools that are on there, but know how they're operating, and don't, that going back to kind of part 1, what we covered with Ron and Matt Barnett, we know why certain things are operating so that you can, connect those dots on your own. So, yeah. I know we also wanted to get into some certifications, things like that too, some parting shots as we roll off and almost at our time limit.
Sure, and I think this is something you could spend an entire 10 minutes on.
Sure.
So I think there's a lot of great resources out there. There's free resources, things that you can go to for web applications. There's OWASP, and for, there's SANS classes, there's SANS webinars, there's all this great stuff. My personal favorite, which was, one that beat me up pretty good, was the OSCP, which is the Offensive Security Certified Professional. And there's a whole range of certs that go up and above and beyond that. But these are things that you can use to get your hands dirty, to start working through some things in a guided way, right? Have somebody show you, kind of start here and keep going. Yeah. So those are things that I would really recommend people that are looking to get into the space check out and get exposure to.
Yeah, and just to throw out some other names, there's some vulnerable software that you can work on, right? Like some vulnerable operating systems. You can set up your own test labs, run VirtualBox, pull that down, or VMware, whatever your flavor of hypervisor is, I don't care. Pull something down, stand up some vulnerable operating systems and test. And again, know how these things work. Run Wireshark, right? Another tool that we kind of talked about before, we didn't mention yet, is run Wireshark and see how this stuff is working at the network level so that you can follow along and piece it together. So, well, thank you, Ryan, for the time today. I think we figured some things out. We'll probably do part 3 in the next couple of weeks, but next week we're going to do what is a mouse mover with our very own Erkin. So,
ooh, that's exciting. I'll have to tune in for that.
You'll have to tune in. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ryan. Have a great day. Take care.